Success has taught me nothing. I've enjoyed them, but like at the end of the day, that's not a teacher. People think that growth comes from success, but the truth is growth comes from failure.
Hello there, it's me, Steve Meller, and welcome in to GrowthReady, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. On this episode, we welcome in global keynote speaker and best-selling author Frankie Russo, who's here to help us understand that for us to grasp what comes with growth, it starts with us accepting that we must familiarize ourselves with the things that we typically try to avoid, starting with our fear of failure. Frankie Russo, welcome to the GrowthReady podcast. I am so excited to be doing this in person with you first and foremost, and I had to do it in person because you're like an hour away, so it would have been just awful had we done this virtual, and we can do it like this. So I appreciate you coming. As always, we are at Cards and Culture, courtesy of Culture Media. Very excited to be doing this live, as I mentioned. Before I go any further, Frankie, please answer the question that I have everybody ask. I have everybody answer on the show, and that is, what does it mean to you to be growth ready?
All right. Well, first off, thank you for having me on the show. I haven't done in person in too long, which is great. So what does it mean to be growth ready was the question. And I didn't prepare for this. So we're just going to go off the cuff.
That's my favorite answer.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the biggest thing about growth that I have found is that fear of failure is the enemy of growth. And most of the time people think that growth comes from success, but the truth is growth comes from failure. And so the most important thing to be growth ready is to have some failure. Because if you haven't had failure yet, you're not actually ready for growth. If you have, then congratulations. You're actually more ready than you might know. Because I think that it's non-negotiable for true sustainable growth to have had enough failure to understand what the opposite of growth might look like, right? And so the opposite of growth is not failure, it's stagnation. And to be growth ready really boils down to realizing that there's a problem that's keeping the growth from happening and a willingness to get honest about it, and then ultimately square off on the fear, which we have a lot of different fears that keep us from growing, but failure's usually the number one. Either I'm afraid that I'm going to lose something I have, or I'm afraid that I'm not going to get something that I want. And so once you're willing to step beyond those two options, right, that making a choice and stepping into something new in order to unlock growth, if I'm willing to be okay with losing something I have or not getting something I want, I'm growth ready.
Immediately 27 questions come to mind, so I got to pick one. But I will say just from the initial response that we have not spoken anywhere near enough about failure on this podcast up to this point. We changed the name to Growth Ready about 8 or 9 months ago after 6 years of it being what it used to be. And now I was excited to have you on for this because I know how much you speak to audiences and have worked with businesses around that block. And for me, it's a block. It's like, why can we not just look at the failure as an opportunity to learn, to grow, as you're putting it here? And yet so many folks will see it as a block. And so just start right there. What have you found when you think about the environments you've worked in, with the businesses you've worked with, the audiences you've spoken to? As humans, why do we put the block in the first place? What is it we don't want to get to know about failure? Because it's this wonderful thing, like you said, that can teach us so much. And yet we just say, I'm okay keeping it in an arm's length, or maybe even further than that. What's that block that we're struggling with?
Well, the block is that we're hardwired to not like pain. So that's the block. The fact is that pain is a gift, just like failure is a gift. But it takes time to believe that, and then have enough belief that you become confident about it, and then have enough confidence that it turns into a conviction, that you act upon. So the fact is that it's simple the way that I'm saying it, but it's not easy. And that's why people are averse to it, because it's hard. And you hear it over and over and over again. The people that are willing to do the hard work are the ones that end up being successful. It doesn't mean you have to hustle. It just means you have to be willing to go first into the fire. And you have to be willing to accept the fact that, like, when things are good, that's the problem. So when things are bad, everybody knows, oh, I got to do something different because my marriage fell apart, or my business just failed, or the whole country had an entire meltdown of the economy or the world, which is what happened to me in 2008.
Right.
So my first big failure was, like, I realized I was a drug addict, I lost my marriage, and my business went to nothing in the mortgage crisis, because when I was in my 20s, I was a mortgage broker.
Right.
Okay. And of course, I was an idiot kid that thought everything I would touch would turn to gold, like most 20-year-olds, and couldn't have been more wrong. But that was the greatest gift. Now, again, a lot of times becoming more than comfortable, but like in love with the idea of change and failure, and like embracing that takes time.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to come naturally. Right. What you want is that you don't have to hunt failure. Right. Failure it'll just find you.
Yeah.
But what you do have to do is recognize that it's non-negotiable for growth. And I think so many times people think, oh, well, growth. Oh, yeah, here's how you do growth. You do 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this framework, and that's how you're going to grow.
Right.
Right. And it starts with breathing. It's like, get
Right.
okay. Do we curse on this podcast?
We can. I call it PG-13.
Bleep that out. I try
PG-13.
not to curse
We
too
can
much.
do the
I'm not, like,
shits
trying
and
to
all that
be-
kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm
We
not
just,
trying to
you
be
know,
Joe Rogan.
it's all
here.
right, it's all right.
You can just bleep that out.
That's all right.
I probably should ask that before the tape started rolling.
all
But
good.
what are you going to do?
We've learned.
So anyway, the bottom line is that, it's not a clean thing. Growth is not clean. You think about people like, oh, we want to evolve. It's like, do you?
Yeah.
Because evolve takes like a crazy amount of pressure over a long period of time.
Right.
So when people start this battle cry that like 2025 is going to be the year we're going to evolve.
Yeah.
It's like, oof, all right. Careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
And we do need to evolve, and we need to do these things. But if we're not in touch with the fact that, like, that's the cornerstone of growth, is that failure is a gift. And so what I tell people all the time, because I work with a lot of like organizations, and I've been doing this a long time for my own companies, and we've unlocked a lot of growth, and it was never like the way we thought it would be. And I've worked with a lot of drug addicts, alcoholics as well. I think I've mentioned this to you in the past, but in 2008, this first failure I was telling you about is when I got sober.
Yep.
And so I've actually learned as much or more from working with about 300 guys trying to get sober as I have working with the fastest growing company in America, which was our company. And so what's interesting is the correlation between the two is that no matter how you split it, when you start doing the things that we're talking about on this podcast, stuff gets better.
Yeah.
And that's actually the problem, is because it does get better. And that's where the real problem begins. A lot of people know how to fire start something or to kick something off. And so that initial growth, that's the easier growth. The harder growth is once you've already become successful. That is much harder growth. And that's where a lot of the work I do today is right there. I call it the stagnation spiral.
Yep.
And it's because
I'm gonna pause you before we go into the stagnation spiral, because I want to hear it.
Yeah, no worries.
I want to hear it. The only reason I'm pausing you right there is because I think
you gotta pause me, so I'll
know.
just go on and on.
I got you. So the one thing I'll say is that something that you were just saying there is, I have to ask this now before we get to the stagnation spiral, because for me, there's so much information out there today around pursue success, pursue growth, and it's very surface level in the sense of like the success and the growth will be our greatest teacher. Right. And something I'm hearing straight away is that's kind of BS. Like that.
That's right.
There's a BS component to that we need to acknowledge.
Growth, success has taught me nothing. Right? I used to love getting awards, have gotten tons of awards in my life. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a natural thing to want that, right? Especially as a dude, you want recognition, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you without a doubt, I've learned nothing from my success and nothing from my rewards. Yeah. Not one thing have I learned from that. I've enjoyed them. They're great. Mom was proud. But like at the end of the day, hey, that's not a teacher.
Yeah.
Like, and by the way, first of all, I try to avoid the word success if at all possible.
Sure.
Like, so I added the word authentic in front of success for one of my books, and I didn't even want to put that, but the publisher made me do it. I hate the word success because it's so subjective. It's almost like me and you arguing about right and wrong, which I'm happy to do if you want.
Right.
But the fact is like, it's subjective. And so growth is something that is also somewhat subjective. It's more personal than subjective, but success, chasing growth and success is not the point.
Yeah.
And when you're chasing success and growth, you won't get it. You will only get it by doing the next right thing as it relates to whatever problem is in front of us. So growth, success, money, those are byproducts of something else. Okay? And the fact is that if you chase those other things, you can sometimes grab them, but it's almost never sustainable. Yeah. And you always pay the price of it.
Yeah.
And so is it BS to chase success and growth? To a degree, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I did not set out to be the fastest growing company in America or the fastest growing company in Louisiana. I didn't set out to do that. I set out to invent something that would help the people that I served. That's it.
Yep.
Okay. And I set out to create a company that would make people believe in us, and then we would turn around and make everybody else believe in them.
Yeah.
Like, and that was our business. I didn't know what that means. Like, what product is that?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that became what we did, and so then all the other stuff is details. It changes, it shifts, and so that shift, the change, all that, you can call it evolution, you can call it, innovation, call it whatever you want. But like, the fact is it's about meeting the need and solving the problem of the people you serve, whether that's your customer or your members or your patients or your colleagues or your community. Those stakeholders, like, meeting that where it's at is all that matters, and doing that every day. That if you are always doing that, and you have a loop, if you will, you've heard me talk about the loop, and we can get into it later, but if you have a continuous loop of doing that, growth, success, money, that becomes inevitable.
Yep.
But if you chase growth, success, and money, like, that's the mistake.
And I talk on this a lot, is that once we can shift growth from being this thing we perceive as a result to more of a process, then we start to acknowledge all of these things that come with it. And to your point, it's growth is this byproduct of many, many things. And that's why, again, I like to articulate it as a process in itself, because suddenly now we better label it in terms of what the experience actually is, in terms of if you're pursuing growth as the outcome, you're not looking at it correctly, because it's not an outcome, really. I mean, it is if you look at just simply data and all the measurables within your company, but at the same time, really, it's an experience, it's a process, it's this thing that comes with failure, comes with all these other elements that we're kind of speaking to here. And I can't help but think, like, how much is the way we're framing the growth and the success as a result affecting our ability to maybe to face the failures that come with it? Like,
well, so here's the thing. Wanting growth, look, let's talk about an organization for a minute. All right.
Yeah.
Who are we kidding?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's January 20th, I think. All right. And so you're already 20 days into the first quarter as an organization.
Yep.
Like, you have to keep growing revenue wise in order to not stagnate and then eventually get left behind or become obsolete.
Right.
You have to do that.
Right.
So I don't ever want to downplay that. But just by simply saying we're going to grow 10%, we're going to grow 5%, and everybody's going to get a bonus. And if everybody does enough activity, then we're going to get there, or whatever. And so, like, you the way that we're trying to get there is the part that's broken. It's fine to want growth. You need it as an organization, right? So I don't want to make this seem like we're, like, downplaying that part.
Sure.
And I live in that space. That's part of the reason why I've really enjoyed the work I do now, is because I understand both sides of it. I'm not just a guy who worked with a bunch of drug addicts kind of trying to tell a Fortune 500 how to grow their revenue.
Yep.
I've done both sides of it, and there's a correlation, and that's the magic,
Yep.
is figuring out that correlation. Because just because we say that we want to get 5-10% growth, like the way that we've in the past historically tried to get there, that's the problem.
Right.
And there's a reason why there's a fear of failure. It starts at a very young age. And it's conditioned into us that failure's bad from the moment we get into kindergarten. It's an F on a test is bad.
Right.
Okay. And so from that moment on, we stop being exactly what we need to be to have breakout growth. For example, simply divergent thinking or being creative. The stuff that we did as a kid, and I've done a lot of work around this, and I don't do a talk without talking about this anymore. But the fact is that like when we were a kid, we all had two things in common. One, we were wildly creative, and we were exactly who we were because no one had told us yet we need to be something else, especially at like 5, 6, before the conditioning starts.
Yep.
I'm not trying to shit on schools, but like the fact is like that's when it's like, okay, cool. If you can see it, if you can count it, if you can read it.
You will never have to qualify this point with me. I couldn't be in more agreement with you.
Okay.
I'm like,
yeah,
we could do a whole nother podcast.
My wife is a much bigger advocate for the whole school thing.
Yeah.
But I will say that like it's a natural thing, and I'm not trying to fix schools. What I'm trying to do is help people realize that if they want to get to that revenue growth, like take over the world thing, that it's different than you think. And the fact, because like, where does that come from? Like people like to talk about innovation. I try to avoid the word at this point. There's two words I try to delete from my vocabulary, and it's disruption and innovation.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, ironically, if you watch my speaker reel right now, those words are all over it. And I'm still waiting for them to do the new reel. It's because like the word's broken. And words do matter. Like the way that we use words, all right, it matters. And it makes a difference in the world. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing now. Yeah. But when you reframe it as like, okay, where does these things come from? Like there's a lot of catchphrases out there. There's a lot of slogans out there. There's a lot of jargon and ease out there about like, here's how you do it. You need this, and this. It's like, okay, great. And like, what does that mean? In reality? And are we really in reality creating a space where we're giving ourselves permission to be divergent? Because being divergent, being creative, being innovative, being messy, breaking shit before it breaks us, okay, that's how you get growth. But like this is why the ultimate enemy of growth is fear of failure, because we're not going to do that stuff if it's going to be failure. And if you got kids, you got money, there's a lot at stake. It's not like we're talking about low stakes stuff right now. It's high stakes, so of course you have fear of failure.
I love how you're using this term stakes. It's something that I speak about when I talk about this relationship we have with commitments with audiences. Just like the difference between a goal and a commitment, in my opinion, is that one lacks stakes, whereas the other one truly comes with stakes. And so what you're speaking to here, there's this lack of comfort along with failure that people have, where when we address the stakes for what they are, because you just said like simply your role as a parent, as a spouse, whatever it may be, there are enormous stakes that come with that so often we just put to one side and we don't actually acknowledge. And if we were to do a better job of acknowledging it, it might actually force us through some of these moments where we can face failure head on and just say, hey, you know what? The stakes are so great that if I just continue to use failure as a reason to not act, then what sort of disservice am I maybe doing? Whereas if I look at these stakes I have in my life, they can encourage me, they can motivate me to actually go and take some of these more bold steps, if you will, to where I actually am going to face my failure. You know, I don't know how much of your, from that 2008 to where you are today, when you think about that part of your life, it's a huge part, it's a huge chunk, but at the same time, how much as those stakes in your life have changed, how have they brought you to face failure more head on, I guess?
Yeah. So first off, great question. And the thing about this whole high stakes thing is that you have to always recognize that it's there, but then you've got to figure out a way to make it matter less. Okay. Because yes, it's high stakes, but it's not life or death per se.
Sure.
And so you've got to figure out a way to make it matter the right size. And one of the ways that I've found to do that is to start breaking it down. When a problem or growth is ambiguous and it's big, you've got to start breaking it down. So whenever there's a lot going on at the same time, sometimes I got to break it all the way down to like what's going on for the next 5 minutes. Like I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow or whatever, But I have a pretty good idea that for today, like, I'm going to be good for today. And sometimes that's what it takes. It's like, okay, how do I get this down to like, what am I going to do today to fulfill my why or to fulfill my weird? And that, like, right this second is the podcast. All right. After this, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
But it's going to be something in line with that. It might be with business, might be with the kids, might be with the wife, might be with the drug addict. Don't know. But when my mindset becomes, how am I going to be of maximum usefulness to other people? That changes it. You see, when it's like, I'm here to help you and whoever the heck is listening to this.
Yep.
Oh, excuse me.
Good.
Whoever's listening to this, right? That's why I'm here. Like, I'm not here because I want to grow my social media or because I need more people to know who I am or any of that stuff. Now, will it grow your social media? Maybe. Will people know who I am? Maybe. I don't know. But the purpose of it, is guaranteed I'm going to fulfill it. It's guaranteed I'm going to fulfill that purpose, which is to be of maximum usefulness. Because I can choose if I'm of maximum usefulness, which means that I have to come into this not afraid, right? So like, when you continually to go into a situation without fear, because the only objective I have is to help you. That's the only reason I'm here. So I'm here to help you. Like, what do I have to be afraid of, right? Like, that changes the game a bit. But at the end of the day, it starts with being honest. Okay, every part of this always starts with getting honest with you, but more importantly with myself, okay, about the problem. Because anybody that's out there right now that's not growing, I promise you, there's a problem and there's some level of denial involved. And it's keeping us in stagnation, right? And that denial might be as simple as like, you know what, this is how we've always done things. And we hit 2% over quarter last year or last quarter. And so I'm going to keep doing what I know. And I'm just going to keep my head down and do that well. And then I'm going to go home to the kids, right? And that is the clinical definition of status quo, right? Or like, you know, there's some things I can see in my teams or in my organization that I think would make a big difference that could really help us grow. But I don't really want to step outside of my silo or my role. That's not really what I get paid for. And when you start to magnify that over 5, 10, 50,000 employees, it becomes an epidemic. And this is what makes it so hard for large organizations to grow, is they get into this stagnation spiral. The first step is admitting that you're in it.
Yes.
So everything always starts with admitting that there's a problem. Whether you're a drug addict and alcoholic, or whether you're a parent or a husband who really is annoyed by what your wife is saying, which I'm not saying that was me last night, but maybe it was. And probably, okay, yes, it was. You know, if it's that, or if I'm trying to figure out, like, why is this like Fortune 500 not growing? Like, it's all starts the same.
Yeah.
And that is, am I willing to get honest about the problem?
Yep. I love that, because something that immediately just comes to mind to sort of piggyback what I was saying earlier about stakes is sometimes when we don't just look at our...
I just realized you got the Drew Brees poster behind you.
Yeah. And it doesn't make sense that the British guy has that.
Yeah, that's not that fair, but you know.
Yeah.
Just saying. Okay, keep going. Sorry, I just got so distracted.
But the idea that if we look at, say, something as simple as our home life and because where my argument was coming from earlier was that sometimes we just avoid creating stakes altogether. So we just operate like there are no stakes. And that in itself pretty much keeps us from, you talk about stagnation, it keeps us pretty stagnant. If we're just operating with no stakes, it's like, it is what it is. If we were just to simply acknowledge where there may be stakes, and then just to kind of now piggyback off what you were saying, is that maybe there is this healthy nature to those stakes that we can create. But that starts with being honest on the front end. And like, that honesty is such a powerful component of all of this, is that if we get honesty right on the front end, then we start to see things for what they truly are. And we acknowledge that from the outset.
Yeah. And part of that is that so the irony is I said, these are high stakes situations. And then I said, make it matter less.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm finding, that balance, which is a ongoing daily thing. You don't land on balance. It's like, it's a constant process. But at the end of the day, it's making it matter less doesn't mean denial or ignoring it.
Yep.
Making it matter less makes it like, all right, cool. This is not life or death, but it is important.
Yes.
And so what am I going to do about it? So once we get honest about the problem, then it becomes, all right, what's my relationship to the problem? And so a big thing that I always do is I inventory it. And it usually boils down to two different options. You either have the stuff you can change, and then you have the stuff you can't change. Okay? And the fact is that it's super important to inventory this. And I find that if I can't figure out what I can and can't change, I get some wisdom from somebody else. Right now, this might sound familiar because it's essentially the Serenity Prayer.
Yeah.
Okay. But what I found is that it's an incredible hack for business and for life, because once we know what we can change, then our job is to burn the list of things we can't. Because essentially, why we give up is usually because we have made the mistake of putting all of our energy into changing the things we can't. Like, I think about that all the time. It's like, you think about chaos and sanity. Everybody hates that, right? It's uncomfortable. And if the Serenity Prayer is having the courage to change the things you can't, accept and change the things you can't, right? Well, then the opposite of that is insanity. And so what that means is that if I want to be insane, it's super, super simple. All I have to do is accept all the things I can change and have the courage to try to change all the things I can't. And you will immediately realize that's why you're insane. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're trying to change the things we can't, and we're burning out on that process.
Yep.
As opposed to changing the things we can, because the things we can sometimes is more uncomfortable.
Yep.
Because the number one thing we can change is ourself. You know, and so like,
You just set that up so beautifully.
well, that's just,
that
it's
is
just reality.
This is Growth Ready 101 right there. Boom.
Yeah, and we didn't exchange notes.
No, not at all.
And that's because there are certain truths in this world that are universal.
Right.
And I always get a kick out of that when I meet people that are basically saying or have experienced the exact same thing as me, and I've never met them. And that's when I know, okay, that's a universal truth. And those are the ones we want to be looking for.
Yeah.
When you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, and you keep seeing it over and over again, but you're not taking action on it, like, that probably means something. So if people are out there looking, I'm not a big guy like looking for signs.
Yep.
I don't look for signs anymore.
Right.
Right. Because if I look, they're there.
Right.
But I'm not like trying to chase signs. I'm more like looking at like, what's a universal truth that like I already know, especially based on my own experience. And how have I basically forgotten that? I'm telling you, the hardest thing is to make growth continuous.
Yep.
It's we can all make a spike.
Yep.
We can all do startup.
Yep.
But to make it continuous and continuously grow is a different game than just starting a fire.
Right.
And because the problem with a fire is that it burns out.
Yep.
Unless we have a way to sustain that fire. And I think that's where a lot of people settle into this stagnation.
And this is why I interrupted you earlier, is that we can now go to the spiral. You didn't realize it, but we were going to set this up even better, as we have done now.
There you go. You're clearly the master. I'm just here, man.
Right. But I want you to speak to stagnation now. I've heard you speak on it in front of an audience, but I think, to your point, like, I'm excited just for you to kind of walk us through how you articulate it in detail. But at the same time, I just want to preface it with, from a stagnation, I've always felt is something we rarely notice until it's too late.
That's right.
And like, for me, because we tell ourselves we're just doing what we always do, or we're just living our norm, or whatever it is. And to your point, if we actually looked at ourselves as a fire, as this thing that over time, if left alone, will eventually go out. Then what are we doing to add fuel to ourselves?
Right.
What are those new concepts? So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in on the front end, mainly because, again, I've heard you speak to this, but just to kind of piggyback off what we've spoken about through these first 20 minutes or so is that acknowledgement of self, and to be able to just say, when we get comfortable doing what comes easy to us and is the norm, stagnation is just going to be right around the corner. And typically it sits with us for so much longer than we're able to sort of acknowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. So the stagnation spiral is something that over the last couple of years I've really like spent a lot of time on as a metaphor, if you will.
Yeah.
And I've come to realize that for most of us out there, it's much easier to identify with the problem than the solution, especially if the solution is something that is a byproduct of something else. Okay. And I think it's so important that we always start with the problem. And for a long time, I thought the problem was being left behind or becoming obsolete or hitting rock bottom. And clearly that's a problem.
Yeah.
But most of the people that I work with, they're not at rock bottom. It's not obvious that disruption is about to slam them. It's not obvious that they're about to get left behind.
Are you talking more from the individual now or the business? Or both?
Honestly, I'm talking about the business.
Yeah. Okay.
But I like that you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Because it's not that different.
No, it's not.
No.
Again.
And a business is the sum total of its individuals. So, yes,
But stay with the business for now, because I want to. I definitely want to get to the person.
I love that. Yeah, no, I was talking about the business. Because at the end of the day, like what happens is that, and this is why the number one thing that defines stagnation spiral is denial. So the stagnation spiral is made up of 5 mini villains. Yeah. So I always like to think of it as hero and villain. So if the hero
you're in a perfect place for this too.
You got all the game cards. So heroes and villains. So the hero, if the hero is limitless growth, or the infinity growth loop, then what's the villain? I always thought that the villain of growth was failure, and it is, or not failure. I'm sorry, obsolescence or getting left behind. But the truth is it's more stagnation than anything else, because stagnation is something that a lot of people are at least a little bit guilty of.
Yeah.
If I'm willing to like be even remotely honest, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, because the fact is, no matter what day it is or how much you're like a growth wizard or whatever, like I'm in stagnation in some aspects, if not a lot of aspects. Like, who are we kidding? Because stagnation, again, it's like the natural default setting of a human and of anyone who's successful or a business. So what happens is we become so good at being successful that we think there's the playbook. And so we think, all right, cool. Things aren't working out. We've been number one for whatever. Like the problem is like, look at this business, right? Amazing business. We're on Perkins Row, which if you're in Baton Rouge, that's like a great freaking location. Like, and figured out a way to sell baseball cards and old video games or wherever we are, and cool hats, and some other stuff they sell here. I don't know everything. I just got here, but he figured out a way to do that, right? So the idea is like, okay, cool. This guy's like now a little bit on a pedestal. It's an anomaly. He's done what most people are just in the grandma's basement doing in eBay. And so you think, okay, cool. This guy made it, which is famous last freaking words, right? Because you wouldn't be wrong. Like, and I bet tons of people walk in and tell him how awesome he is and how awesome this is. And I get the same kind of crap in what I do. And it's like, that's great. And when I was a kid or even a young adult, I lived for that. Like, I thought that crap mattered. And nowadays, I say thank you, but it does nothing to me. And the reason it does nothing to me is because I realized about 7 or 8 years ago that what people think of me or what people perceive of me is not my business, and it doesn't actually matter that much. Which is a very freeing thing. And so the thing about the stagnation spiral is that denial is the number one thing. Now, here's the problem with denial. The other ones besides denial, just to get this out the way before I forget, is status quo, silos, or isolation, rigid beliefs and practices, and disengagement. So if you feel any one of those 5, you're probably in a stagnation spiral currently. You're not obsolescent. You're not left behind yet, but there's a threat. And again, so what ends up happening is that inevitably growth starts to slow, and you start to go from stagnation, which let's just say is flat, and starts to go down. And when you're an established business, the first thing you do is look at what did we do to get successful in the first place? It's the natural thing, right? And so that's why like older generations leading businesses right now, they're like, this is what we used to do. This is what we're going to do. And so they're like, do that. We're going to do that.
Right.
New person comes in, divergent idea comes in. They're like, whoa, no, you don't get it. This is how we got here. We were number one. We're still number one. Market's down. We're going to get this back the way we got here. And that's when the problem starts.
Yeah.
And then when that doesn't work, they double down on that. It's something I call brute force.
Yeah.
And it's actually brute force that is what drives the burnout. Yeah. It's what kills the sustainability. It's the brute force.
You're living in that insanity, right? Like to what you were describing before.
Exactly. Brute force is like, we're going to change the things we can't because that's who we are. We're big enough and we're too big to fail or whatever, right? And so you get in that mindset and that's when you have dead bodies. You might hit your numbers, but like people are in droves leaving the organization and you can't even figure out why. And then you pay 15 burnout speakers to come in and talk about breathing and taking a vacation. And it's like, okay, there's something deeper here, right? And nothing against my burnout speaker friends, right? You know who you are. But the fact is that like there is a deeper thing and it's being able to identify it. And you hear all these catchphrases like, someone's going to, one of my buddies, Josh Linkner, always says, somebody's going to come take your job one day. Wouldn't you prefer that be you that takes your own job?
Right.
Yeah, kind of like disrupt yourself, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And again, these are all catchphrases, but there's some truth to this because at the end of the day, if I'm not consistently breaking my own why, if you will, then it's going to break me.
Yeah.
Like that's just all there is to it. Those are your two options. And so like, that's where the work is. And that's what our job is today. How do I do something new? Because it turns out the answer to like stagnation and being left behind is that I'm constantly embracing the new with courage and bravery.
Yeah.
And that's really the way to growth is that if I'm one, getting honest about the problem, two, consistently imagining a new solution, and then three, collaborating with others without boundaries and constantly experimenting and breaking stuff and staying in the messy middle and then coming back from what we learned from that to getting honest about the problem that created, that becomes the loop.
Yep.
Okay. And when you stay in that loop, getting honest about the problem, imagining a new solution, experimenting and collaborating together, breaking stuff, coming back to get honest about that, and you start to create that, if you stay in a loop of that, and that becomes your new norm, you will always have growth.
And that's a process that's worth getting on board with. And I wanted to, as you were speaking, there was two things that came to mind. One, I make fun of this all the time, is when leaders will just in that kind of organization that you were explaining before that doubles down on the way we've always done things. Those are the same leaders that just tell their people trust the process.
Right.
And if anybody actually says, "Hey, can you describe the process?" Someone's gonna be like, "Just trust it, all right? Just trust it."
Yeah.
It's like you can't just
Basically,
say that.
just shut up and do your
right,
job.
just shut up and do it. And it's just like that. That's what you're speaking to here. Is that there's this? That is
wrap up your OKRs.
Right. You joke about it on like social media and all these things that get articulated on times, and we just kind of fall into it and just that sounds like a great thing. It's just like, but trust the process really doesn't mean anything if the process, one, can't be defined, and two, isn't actually serving growth.
Yeah. If you don't have a process, then you're nothing to trust other than like the process. Then like trust that like.
What they're saying is trust me in that moment. They're saying trust me.
Yes.
Just trust me. Just trust me. And it's just like that. That doesn't really mean anything. But the second part I wanted to mention was what you said in the first part of your response there is like that comfort, well, the way in which you're now receiving praise specifically. And it's one thing that whenever I'm out and about and it's a networking thing and my wife happens to be there and someone praises me in any way, shape or form, she always gives me a hard time on the way home. Like, you don't take that well. You don't like you say thank you, but then we get back in the car and you don't really care at all that someone sort of acknowledged that. And you actually helped me just see something now for the first time. You actually articulated what I've always been portrayed as humility in myself. I'm actually thinking to the way you just described. Like for me, the moment I get comfortable assuming that I'm doing it a way that's going to work for a long time is the moment I know that I'm probably going to start to get stagnant and stop pursuing and stop experiencing growth. And so for me, it's so important that I don't allow my brain to receive this feedback in a way to where it's like, yeah, you've done it, dude, or yeah, you've got it figured out, man. Like, because even going back to my years in sports, that was like, it would kill you as an athlete. As an athlete, if you ever assumed that the way you're training and the way you're doing it is the way and the only way, watch everybody else you're competing with slowly move further and further away from you. And that is how I've always been ingrained to receive feedback, is like, appreciate it, but whatever you're giving me feedback on right now positively probably won't even be the same thing I'm doing a year from now. I cannot allow that to be the case.
Well, here's the other thing. Perception's 9/10 of the law. And people are supposed to think we're successful.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's on brand that's like, oh my God, look at this. Like, yeah, we're in media, we're in events, we're in things that are a little bit larger than life by nature. So I have to also look at that, right? But one thing is that pedestals are a terrible, terrible burden. And it's up to us to burn them, not them.
Yeah.
It's up to us to burn the pedestals. I used to have a super high pedestal 8 years ago. Like, it was a golden pedestal. I spent so much energy making so many people believe that I was the man. And I burnt it all to the ground when I got my divorce.
Yeah.
And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was very susceptible to pedestals. And many times we are, especially as men, susceptible to this idea. And I've seen tons of people take advantage of me as a result, where I'm like, they're telling me I'm the man, and it wasn't always like this. We're like, I used to chase that crap.
Sure.
And the problem is that we get so obsessed with what people think about us that I have guys ask me all the time, like, dude, how do you do it? Like, how do you get to a point where, like, what people think about you doesn't affect you anymore? I said, well, first of all, there's a trade-off. So you don't ever get to a point where you no longer worry what people think about you. Bad, because really usually what it is that we just don't want them to think bad.
Right.
We'd like them to think good, but just don't think bad of us.
Right.
Right? Because otherwise that would prove the fact that we're not enough.
Right.
Okay. And that's what we're all deep down afraid of, is that somebody's going to find out we're not enough, or we're a fraud, or whatever. Right. And that's most humans, especially men's fear. And once you get to the point where you no longer need them or care if they think of you positively, that's the moment where you no longer also are afraid of what they think of you negatively. And that's the most freeing moment of a human's life. And which everyone gets to this moment. It's just that some people get to it at 75, right? Or 85. Like, you never see an old person give a shit about what people think about them.
At all.
Right? The secret is to get to that mindset at 35.
Right.
You're not getting there in your 20s. Forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
Just don't even bother. Just do your thing. But 35, which was when it happened for me, or 40, or even 45, like earlier, get to that point where you realize that, like, what am I even doing here? Like, what are we doing here? Right? And that's where I started to realize, like, okay, if this loop requires a new solution, this became the heartbeat of my work. Because so many people don't identify as imaginative or creative. So they're like, well, where do I go with that? And this, again, becomes a byproduct thing. You can't pursue creativity. Okay, you can't pursue imagination. You just have to give yourself permission to be in that space.
Just be.
And the fact is that, and this is where the whole love your weird thing came. I never loved my weird. In fact, people told me I was weird as a kid because I was trying to invent time machines, and I was trying to go to space, and I was a cowboy, and I was a TV preacher. Okay, that's what I was trying to be at 5. And we were all trying to be something at 5, and like some of us maybe haven't even thought about that in a long time. And the fact is that there's something very, very important about that part of us that is actually the raw element that's needed for this loop I'm talking about, right? So each one of us has a weird that allows for it to be our puzzle piece in solving this new, divergent, innovative way forward that hasn't been tested or created yet, okay? And bringing that to the table is everything. But we have to give ourselves permission to do that, okay?
Yeah.
Like, when you were 5, 6 years old, what were you into?
Yeah, well, you've done this. I was in an audience when you did this exercise, and for me, I was a performer. Like before I was an athlete, I was a performer. Like every family
What were you doing?
occasion,
Singing,
yeah,
skits?
everything,
What are we
all
talking
of the things, like all the things, like every family event, I would be the ringleader of pulling my sister and my cousins and being like, "Hey, let's do a performance
Let's
for
do
the
a
parents.
show."
Let's do a show of some sort." And I had no idea how we ever came up with the concepts of the show, but
Yeah.
we would literally leave the room and do the dress rehearsal,
right.
the whole 9 yards.
Love it. Yeah,
and I
yeah.
did that till I was like 11 or 12. I was like, I'm slowing down on this.
I remember that.
So
That's awesome. Yeah. So when you stopped, why'd you stop doing that?
well, this is where it gets interesting for me because in a way, I actually fought on behalf of that version of myself until I was 18 years old. So I did theater studies until I was into my 17, 18. I got to a point with my sport where with swimming, it just got so all encompassing that I had no other option but to give it up.
Yeah.
And then I let for about 15 years go by from the age of 18 to my early 30s where I never embraced that part of myself.
That's right. And so what made you abandon that and go to focus so much on swimming?
Oh, being serious, being committed, being disciplined, all these kind of things, and believing that would somehow prevent me from optimizing how I performed in that space I was now having to be in.
And why did you believe that?
Because everything around me told me that was the case.
Right.
Everything. I had every influence in my life.
It was conditioned
told me.
into you.
That's right. Conditioned.
That because the thing about it is that there's a time clock which makes it measurable.
Yep.
It always comes back to a number.
Yep.
Right. It's measurable, and in the end, money usually is the thing that defaults everything back. So. Because even the success of swimming somehow could be maybe one day tied to sponsorships. It always comes back to some kind of money.
Right.
And the fact is that once you get to that point where you're willing to go back to that part of yourself, you realize, okay, not only is this going to make me happy, which is great. A lot of people chasing happiness, and you want to be happy, right? And you do need to figure out a way to do all the things we're talking about and still be fulfilled and happy. So that is important. But it's more than just fulfilling your passions or being happy.
Yeah.
It's actually that the unique genius that you have to give to the world that you were coded and born to give to the world. It's your weird, right? And now you live it, right?
Yeah.
So now you are in show business to a degree.
To an extent. Yeah.
And you're in some of these different things. And so of course it lights you up, it lights others up, and you're constantly doing what it takes to grow in your own world and your own business because it's important to you, because it goes back it stretches your whole self, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so loving your weird, first off, a lot of people think weird means piercings and the way you look, but you don't have to look weird to love your weird. People have told me all the time, you don't look that weird.
Yeah.
How are you the love your weird guy?
Right.
And that's because you don't have to look weird to love your weird. And the weird I'm talking about is not your typical weird. I'm fine with all the other stuff. You got piercings, whatever else. Hey, let's knock it out. But this is more of an inner work of what is that thing that's my supernatural quality? Or what is that? Because the original word weird, not everybody knows this. You do because you've seen my talk. But the fact is the original word, you go back 15th century when it was the Old English word, it was spelled differently. W-Y-R-D.
Yep.
But it wasn't just spelled differently, it had a very different meaning. It meant the power to control or influence your fate, destiny, and then my personal favorite, which is supernatural qualities. And that's really the thing that struck me and why I've done so much work around this love your weird thing, because at the heart of this, when you love your weird, your pure genius can come out. And when you have an organization that's harnessing the collective genius of everybody already in the organization, that becomes a force that can drive the loop.
Yep.
And when that becomes our main focus is how can we bring all the pieces and all the genius together, and that becomes our north of how are we doing that, and everyone feels like they have permission to show up their own brand of weird and with their full self. You begin to create this powerful culture, and you create powerful and amazing products.
Yep.
And you're positioned in a way where you're going to grow. Growth becomes inevitable at that point, because loving your weird is the opposite of being afraid of failure.
Yep.
Right? And you don't have to wait till you're 75 to 85 to love your weird,
Nope.
right? Because I'm telling you, when people are old, they love their weird. Like they don't,
Right.
they just don't care.
Right.
And if we can get there earlier, like wow, and all of us are there at 5.
Yep.
And the one thing about being 5 that is the second thing, because I'd mentioned the first thing is that it we're more creative and divergent. But the fact is that at 5, 6 years old, one thing that was consistent is that we actually believed the things we were doing could be something. We believed that things that were everybody else said was ridiculous or impossible
Right.
could be something. We believed that.
Yep.
And that's the piece that's missing for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Is we've stopped believing. And I think that's an epidemic in and of itself, is that we've stopped believing that things that are invisible or things that are impossible are important. Because we've been taught, like, if you can't add it up or you can't read it or you can't write it or it doesn't make money, it's childish.
Yeah. It's that word permission is such a strong word in everything that you're talking about here. Is that, again, just to go through all the different areas that you've pinpointed, let's start with businesses. I mean, that ability to create a, love your weird within an organization, you're giving everybody within that organization permission to show up in their most comfortable self possible.
That's right.
And we use this word authentic, and it's a great word for it, no doubt about it. But I think what I love about the way you present it is that you're actually articulating a little bit of the process behind it in it as well. Like, you're not just saying like, hey, make room for people to be themselves. Like, to just say, hey, how about we just start with a discussion about what makes you, what's the weird thing about you that makes you you?
When you tell somebody, hey, what's your supernatural quality? Not everybody can answer that, right? And so, all right, so where do I start? Well, let's go back to before the conditioning. Because every single person has some conditioning, either parents or bullies or school, even if it's small conditioning, or even worse, a lot of people have had big conditioning, also known as trauma. And so it's normal to not think about we're into at 5. Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
But I have found that it's this incredible thing and tool that when we consistently give ourselves that permission to show up like that, we start to remember certain things that like should not have been forgotten.
Right.
Okay. And there's a reason why most transformational emotional work is using inner child work.
Yeah.
We just have assumed that it's like psychological, like psychiatry or psychology or whatever, or like therapeutic. I didn't realize until I plugged this into my own companies. So 8 years ago, I started going through my own journey of doing experiential therapy and loving my weird. And it was mostly to like work through my divorce. But then I started plugging it into my companies. And like, when I tell you, like, we created the Love Your Weird culture at my companies, that's when we actually went from like having growth like 2x and 3x and 5x to 60x in 3 years. And then that was what led to us selling to a Fortune 500 company.
Right.
So this isn't like playground type stuff.
No.
This is heavy duty. And once I realized that, I was like, well, this is too important for me not to sell out my own life to it, which is the work I do now.
Yeah.
Because it's important. And I believe it's a missing component where everybody else is thinking, cool, more activity, more KPIs, more OKRs and all this stuff. It's like, no, you will have your OKRs, you'll have your KPIs, and you'll have your money.
Yeah.
Okay? Because let's face it, the God that America prays to is money. Okay? And I get it. And so what if there was a way to have what you want, which is money, and all your OKRs and KPIs and revenue and low churn and employee, blah, 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 but not have dead bodies behind you.
Right.
And not only not have dead bodies behind you, but what if not having dead bodies behind you as you pursue this money was how you sustainably get the money? Like it's even for the most capitalistic, money-hungry person, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that once I realized that changed everything for me.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work I do now is with individuals and organizations is figuring out what is their why, like what's their expertise, what is the thing that like they're actually going to do for people.
Sure.
And then what is their weird. And the intersection of the why and weird is where the real powerful nuclear energy source starts to take hold inside of an organization.
Yeah.
Is when people are constantly looking at that intersection.
Yeah.
Like, how does your weird of being a show person and loving that and all that intersect with your why to help others grow in business?
Yep.
Right.
Sure.
And that's what makes you unique. Because look, a lot of people talk about growth, or a lot of people talk about peak performance, or a lot of people talk about this and that. And that's your why. And that's good. You need to be an expert at something.
Yep.
But what is your weird that intersection with that? Intersects with that. That becomes the category of one.
Yeah.
That's when you become in the pocket of like, because we say all these things, purpose and passion, and they're all true. But how do I get there? My wife, my new wife, the good wife, Tracy, she never read my first book. She started to. She couldn't get past the second chapter because she was like, this doesn't make any sense. I feel like if I'm not you, then this book is worthless to me. Like, I don't know how to apply it. Like, it's just, I'm either, okay, cool. If I do everything you did, then maybe I'll be successful, but this isn't helping me. Right. And I took that to heart. You know what I mean? First I was offended, and then I was like, all right, cool. What am I going to do with this?
Yep.
And the fact is that, you know, we all have to figure out what is it that this is going to do to help other people. You know, and how does the weird and why affect other people? Because as I started to realize that helping other people bring out their weird and why, that's when the real magic begins.
Yeah. And even presenting it, I love how you just presented that in a way where like the product of all this work is creating a category of one.
Yes.
In yourself. Because again, you go back to that, love that insight around the book. We have a similar wife in that regard. My one and only book remains
most
on
good
my
wives
wife's
are both our
bedside
best.
table.
Yeah.
It's been 2 years.
That's right. I rewrote a second book basically
Right.
dedicated to her
Right.
for that purpose. And I don't even know if she's read all of that one. So in her defense, and then if I mentioned it to her, she's like, well, we have 6 kids.
What's the irony? My wife
we
is
have all
encouraging
these
me to
things.
write a second book, and I'm like, try reading the first one. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So no,
You know?
it's a funny thing, but yeah, good partners, good wives. You know, if you have husbands, whatever, it's always going to be somebody that one is annoying as shit,
Right.
and then 2 is basically going to be our biggest critic. But 3, when they like something or when they say this is good, you can take it all the way to the bank.
Right.
That's the good part. Like when
Right.
my wife says that was a great talk, I know it. You
but
know,
even the category of 1 point is like when you think about how you maybe wrote that first book. I'm curious, like, had you done enough work around yourself to feel as though you were a category of 1 when you wrote that first book?
first of all, I had definitely not done enough work.
Right.
Okay. And it was before I got divorced that I wrote that book.
Okay.
And the subtitle was Master Your Purpose.
Right.
And I was 35.
Right.
So put it all together. I mean, I would have scorched the earth with that book if it didn't allow for me to have 2 books that were bestsellers. Like
Sure,
otherwise, like you would not be able to find.
But
that.
no, but I'm glad that you've given us that insight. I think it's
Oh yeah,
it
like
serves Frankie. It serves so much of what you've already shared with us is like.
every mentor said, "Don't write a book till you're 40," and I was like, no, hold
Right.
my beer.
I was 37,
I don't drink, but yeah,
so
hold
I
my
did
beer.
a bit early, but
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing is like, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's again, you could look at it as like, man, I shouldn't have done that. No, of course you should. Like everything there is no bad. I think that's where we get into a lot of issues is that like we spend so much energy on good and bad and right and wrong. When if you go all the way back to the beginning of time, not to get religious with you, but like, you know, even if it was a metaphor, there was only one type of thing we weren't supposed to eat, and it was this idea of right and wrong and the knowledge of it.
Right.
Okay. And there's a reason for that. And it wasn't like, oh, this effed up test or like an experiment or self-will. No, it's not. It was a gift. It was a gift because it was the one thing that we're not supposed to focus on and dive into and make our decisions based on. Because the problem with knowing not what's right and wrong or good and evil is that first I judge you. And that's not great.
Yeah.
But what's worse is how I judge myself.
Yeah.
And it's from the wrong it's the wrong question.
Yeah.
Right? It's the wrong question because I talk about this, and well, I'll just ask you. Okay, so 9/11, New York, 2 planes go into the towers. Do you think that was wrong?
I do.
Good. Now, that was a trick question, and we are on tape.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. It's like, okay,
Yes.
where's he going with this?
Like,
I think it is too, right?
Yes.
Because, 6,000 plus people died. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Now, here's the problem. Right now, I don't know, 11 o'clock is a little late, but like somewhere in the world right now, there's two guys that not only thought it was the right thing, then God told them to do it.
Yeah.
So are those two guys right, or are we right? Right? It's like, it's tough. And it's like, well, we say, well, we were right because they died. And on it goes. So the thing is, it's a trick question.
Yeah.
Because right and wrong, good and bad, good and evil, wrong question.
Yeah.
Here's the real question. And this is going to bring it full circle.
Yep.
Because this is exactly what I said the first step is to getting into the growth loop. The real question is, how many lies did they have to tell to get those two planes into the building over how many years?
Right.
And the answer is millions.
Yeah.
Millions of lies. And so I don't ask myself if is it right and wrong anymore. I ask myself a simple question, and this has become my north. And that is, do I have to lie about it? Do I have to lie to you, which is the obvious one, but more importantly, do I have to lie to myself? That becomes the north on the compass. Screw right and wrong, good and evil. It's super subjective.
Yeah.
Depending on what religion you're in, depending on where you live, what day it is, give me a break.
Right.
But do I have to lie about it changes things. And it just so happens that like getting honest is the cornerstone and the baseline for getting into growth. It's like boom. Because, and it's not easy. And I spend a lot of time lying.
Yeah.
I lied a lot, and so I'm an expert at lying.
Yep.
Until I got to a point where I had to get honest,
Yep.
And I had different moments that forced me to do that. Getting sober, getting divorced, getting, all kinds of stuff has happened that keeps pushing me back to like, dude, are you being honest with yourself about the situation?
Right.
But that is always the first step. Once I'm like, in this space of like overcoming fear. But I say all that because I think it's so important that we always go back to like, am I being honest about the problem? And then immediately go into what's my part on this problem? Like, what can I change? And I think that's really, really important as people are like listening to this or watching this and thinking like, where do I start? That's where we start.
Yeah.
Am I being in denial about the problem because it feels so big?
Yeah. And I think that's a great place for us to bring this to a close, is giving people that first step, because we've given them a heck of a lot to sort of really provide the context that we needed for that first step to make sense. And all I wanted to add / maybe ask as we start to close is that when you look at where you are now, because you've given us a really nice timeline over the course of this hour of 2008, where we are now, 2025, nice 17-year time stamp for you, just to say, as you look at where you are today, Frankie, like, how are you practicing honesty daily now?
So the way that I practice honesty daily and really kind of stay in the loop is the work I do with other drug addicts and alcoholics, and
I'm so glad you brought it back to that.
Yeah, and the work I do as a father and husband.
Sure.
Okay, so like in reality, it's more of that keeps me staying in that space than the business work that I do.
Yeah.
I now am constantly in my own loop with other people, so I'm constantly helping other people do that. But what keeps me accountable is consistently helping somebody that's at bottom, helping my kids, and helping my wife. I mean, because one thing about being married, as you know, is that like there's always something popping up that's going to rub me the wrong way. So the biggest thing about staying honest actually boils down to feelings and emotions.
Yep.
Okay. And so what I have to be on the lookout for is checking in, like, what am I feeling? Is it anxious? Is it happy? Is it fearful? Is it depressed? Whatever I'm feeling, am I consistently asking myself, why do I feel that way? Especially if it's big, if it gets big, because I'm like angry. The way I stay honest is that I ask myself, why am I angry? Because once I realize that I'm 100% responsible for all emotions, even though like it's so easy to be like, oh, well, of course I'm angry because she did that or he did this.
Right.
It's like, look at it, right? And it's clear and it's obvious. And so we just stay in this loop of like anger because we're justified. It's like, okay, and we can do that. But it doesn't serve me, right? And you kind of have to try that loop of like anger, fear, resentment, and all that stuff for a while before you realize like this is not helping. Yep. And even if I'm justified, I'm not growing. I'm not getting anywhere with it. So the way I stay honest daily is I look at the emotional parts of things. We all feel things, or the lack thereof of emotions. Right. Either way, I'm either feeling emotions or I'm feeling nothing. Either way, I'm looking at that. I will inventory it. A lot of times I'll inventory it either with a friend or a sponsor or a mentor or my wife, somebody. Yep. I'll bounce it off of people. That helps me stay honest, because one of the biggest things of staying honest when it comes to denial, especially, is that another person has to be involved. Like you can't actually spot denial that well by yourself.
Right.
But usually you don't have to ask people if they see it. They're probably already telling you. You're just ignoring it or fighting it or being defensive about it. Like all you have to do is just kind of stop for a second and be like, what have people been telling me that I've been arguing with them about? Right. Or purposefully ignoring? You don't ever have to ask somebody if you're in denial. Just look around. And I try to look around more. Not perfect at it. It's a daily journey. But I try to take direction from other people. I try to look at other people's perspectives. And I try to look at, where do I keep feeling things I don't like the way I feel? And again, there's nothing wrong with discomfort, provided that this is how I'm inventorying that discomfort. Discomfort's good because it's an indicator.
Yep.
Okay, there's something that for some reason this is bothering me more than it should. Because we're talking about like something that's not that big a deal. And I'm freaking out like it's life or death.
Yeah.
I got to look at that and be like, why does this matter so much? What could I do to make this matter less?
Yeah. And my initial question there was a little loaded, because I was insinuating that this is something we should practice daily. And you more than reinforced the fact that is the case, that you are very much on your own loop at all times. And I think
I try to be.
Yeah, you try to be. And I think for me, what I'm taking from our hour together, man, is like, I personally look at this now as a way for me to show up more consistently with my weird, first and foremost, to those that know me best. Because I think that's something that I'm hearing through this. It's like, it's one thing to just go into an organization and speak to these things, but how about we just start with those that know us best? And
what's right in front of you.
Right, exactly. What's right in front of you. And what I also just want to acknowledge too is just how seamlessly we've woven from business to person to business to person throughout this entire hour. And just acknowledge that to anyone listening to this that is hell-bent on building a business, building on the career that they dream of, all this kind of thing, is that line is so faint between who you are and what you do. And the more we can just say, you know what, let's get rid of the line and let's practice principles that serve both. And that's really something that's come through in our hour, man. And whether that's something that you've heard before in feedback or not, that's my way of telling you to receive the feedback and to
I like it.
to just to appreciate you for your time. Before I let you go though, brother, as always, give you the space. Just where can we learn more about you? You have your own podcast. You have so many books. You have all these things going on. Where do people go to learn more about Frankie Russo?
I guess ask Siri. Or Alexa or ChatGPT. I don't know, where do people go anywhere. It's Frankie IE Russo RUSSO, and I think it's on all of them. You can ask whoever.
You're consistent.
Ask somebody.
The website, Instagram.
Yeah, website's frankierusso.com. Yeah, we're on major social medias.
Yep.
TikTok got banned, but I think it's coming back. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a big TikToker, but yeah, LinkedIn and Instagram I'm probably the most consistently busy
active
with.
Yeah.
I do have a podcast, The School of Weird, and a couple of books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever. And but yeah, Ask Siri or Alexa or Google Home or whatever your favorite thing is. ChatGPT.
Appreciate you, brother. This has been really fun. Glad we got to do this. And yeah, man, just thanks for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. So glad to be on, man. Thank you.
My thanks again to Frankie for joining us on this episode, and blown away by the insight. I was taking notes, producer was taking notes, everybody was taking notes that was listening in live, and I really want the main point that I want to make in closing to be exactly this. What problem do you need to identify within your world right now, within your approach, when you think about how you are pursuing the best version of yourself? If you're a business owner, if you're someone who's high up within an organization, what problems are you not identifying, and what is that in itself creating and causing across other areas of the business and other areas of your team? There are other problems that are coming because there is a problem that continues to not be acknowledged. Start with the problem. I love how so much of what we spoke to in this conversation came back to that insight from Frankie, and it's such a simple way to start. If you're put off by complexities that our guests can sometimes provide as we get deeper and deeper into the conversation, and you sort of hear it and you go, this is incredible insight, but I wouldn't even know where to start. There's a simplicity to that insight of just identify the problem. Or what is a problem? What is a problem that you can identify right now that needs to be not only identified, but worked on, broken, and for you to start working through and overcoming some of these potential resistances and adversities that could be in your way, that because you're not identifying the problem, you're not even actually doing any work around it. So again, so much to take from this episode. I have no doubt that you took your own notes and were able to speak to the importance of avoiding stagnation, of getting to the heart of your why, of, you know, the denial and the villain within us and within our lives. There's so many insights where I could have gone with this particular takeaway, but I want you to start simple. Identify a problem and start doing some work around it. Remain open-minded, remain curious about it, and don't be afraid to face your fear as you're going through that, because there may be a temptation to avoid it because there may be failure on the other side. That's not what this show is about. This show is about facing these kind of insights and making sure we embrace them in a way to further develop ourselves on our journey. So again, my thanks to Frankie for his insights, for his generosity of time, and my thanks to you as always for listening. Really do appreciate it. And I think if this is the first time you're listening to the show, you need to be a subscriber, because this is just the most recent installment of the quality of insight that we're getting right now from our guests. Not that we weren't getting it anyway. If you do subscribe, I encourage you to go back and listen to the copious amounts of other episodes as well that you can access over the time of the show. And in the meantime, as always, folks, continue to be your best self, at least strive to be, and continue to come back and listen to ways that we can help you on that journey. Best of luck with everything and anything in your world. I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.